Welcome to BeSimply. This is Suzanne Toro, and I want to thank you for being here today. We have special guests, Kerri Kelly. She's the author of American Detox, The Myth of Wellness and How We Can Truly Heal. Without further ado, let's dive in with Kerri.
So I want to thank you, Kerri, for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your most recent great work. You do so many amazing things. Today we're going to dive into a couple of your initiatives and your new book, The Myth of Wellness and How We Can Truly Heal, American Detox. One, I want to congratulate you, bravo, and welcome you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Having had the experience of writing a book, and your book had a little bit of a pause, like most of humanity over the past 2 years. I'm really curious because it was such a so information rich. Like no one can go wrong without reading your book and all the things that you have put in there to help people validate and back check what you're talking about in your perspectives. But one thing I'm really curious is from the inception to this moment, what would you add in that's not included, or what would you want to additionally point people to within the book that might not stand out to them?
No one has asked me that question, in fact. So thank you. Gosh, I mean, there's a laundry list of regret. Regret's the wrong word, but a book is really hard because it becomes enshrined and it can never encompass all of the things. And so I had to be really discerning, right, about what went in there and the purpose of the book and what my right role and responsibility was in writing it and what it meant to serve, right? I really felt a responsibility to exposing the well-being gap, right? And that predetermines who gets to be well and who doesn't in this world. And so, a lot of what's emerging actually in real time, I speak to in the book. Given what's happening with Roe v. Wade, I do wish I went I wish I went a lot deeper on bodily autonomy to prepare people more fully for what's coming and for what's inevitable, given what we believe is going to be coming down from SCOTUS over the next couple of weeks. But there's so much in the book, quite frankly, because it really is my sort of grappling and journey with unpacking all of the ways in which I've been shaped and indoctrinated by dominant culture. And so I speak to the legacy of colonization and the colonizer virus that I've internalized. I speak to privilege, right? I speak to class, and of course I speak to whiteness, being a white-bodied person in America, and the ways in which I've been shaped, trained, if you will, rewarded, right, for being complicit and for complying with white supremacy, and just given what we're seeing, what just happened in Buffalo, right? None of this is new, and yet it is a culmination, right, of a wound that has been festering for many hundreds of years. And so, I think I would kind of point people to the chapter Wellness Beyond Whiteness, especially white-bodied people for whom I think this book is really for, since I'm a white-bodied person, and really invite folks to reckon with what it means to be white and what we're up against, right? Because I think, and Resmaa Menakem is writing about this in his most recent book, The Quaking of America, but I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that white supremacy is not just a threat to Black, Indigenous people of color. It is a threat to all of us. It is a threat to our collective survival. And so I think it's imperative, if not essential, for white folks to do the personal reckoning, but then, simultaneously do, the radical engagement in the deconstructing and the dismantling of the institutions, the systems, and the culture that has been informed by white supremacy, so that hopefully we can slow down this acceleration and the white violence that has stemmed from this history, and explore something different.
Yes. Wow. I'm like, woo, buzzing off everything you just said. Yeah, so as I was reading, because I was like, we're kindred spirits in many ways. And I was like, I felt your raw, like, just sharing like your passion, your soul. And, that comes across in just your eloquent response just now. My question for you, because you touched on, if we go into what has been, I tend to stay away from these terms because I'm more of a person that is working to educate people to move beyond duality. But you mentioned your yoga path, and I totally agree with you in the impact that capitalism has had on a wellness industry, especially when it's only for those that can afford it. If we look at how do we make well-being affordable to all, what kept coming in my mind when I was reading your book is I wanted to know, where does karma come into play for you? I've thought about this a lot, as these conversations have presented themselves in society, and based on my own personal travels all over the world and work with the indigenous tribes, there's this aspect of cause and effect that we can't evade. And it appears right now we're given the chance to use the words of white privilege to make things right with all our relations. And that's a choice that each one of us can make. For you, how do you relate to that, like the cause and effect? Because it's kind of like the wheel, like today you or I might be this ethnicity, but tomorrow in the future, again, in the reincarnation model, not to offend anyone of any of their theological belief systems, but we might be something else. Irregardless if someone buys into that, there's these generations that we're feeding into or paving the way, right? The shoe can always be on the other foot. So for you, sorry, that's a long lead in, but how does that, either the word cause and effect or AKA karma that's taught in the East, play into your role in making things right?
Gosh, that's a deep question. I feel like I can't really speak to the ways in which karma plays out across lifetimes. I feel like I'm having a hard enough time reckoning with my time in this particular lifetime and what I owe to my ancestors and what I owe to future generations. And so the thing that's coming up for me right now is this idea of debt. And there's this great article by Eulabis that was in the New York Times many years ago called White Debt. And one of the things that she says is that the German word for guilt, which I feel like trips so many people of privilege up, right? Like people get stuck in guilt and shame. They get silenced by it. There's inaction. That it's, that it's actually about debt. It's actually about what we owe. And that's sort of the way I think about privilege, because, I think in a lot of ways we've talked so much about privilege, right? Privilege being sort of like unearned advantages, right, that come with the many identities and social group memberships that we might embody. And privilege also being in deep relationship, encounter relationship with oppression, right? Privilege doesn't exist without the oppression of other people. And so the thing that's coming up for me is just this idea of what do we owe given our points of privilege, right? And the tool of social location has been really helpful for me in grappling with my identities, my many different identities, right? Because I'm not just white and I'm not just middle class and I'm not just cisgender, right? I'm all of those things at the same time and more. And so what does that mean about my proximity, right, to power and to privilege and all the things that come with that, things like access and time and agency and choice and education, and of course wellness, right, which this book is about. And what does that mean about my responsibility, right, to correct the disproportionate and unequal distribution of resources, of agency, of access to different groups and to different peoples. And so that's sort of the way that I've been working with privilege. I know a lot of people talk about how do I use my privilege? I don't think of it that way because I don't actually think of privilege really as a good thing necessarily. It has advantages, right? And it comes with proximity, but it also has costs. And it can be soul-sucking when we think about the history, right, that's come along with the privilege of let's say, the racial privilege of whiteness, let's say. And so anyway, so a lot of my reckoning, and I talk a lot about that, this in the book, is really around what do I owe? And also, what is my right role and responsibility, right? Given my social location, given where I'm situated, in proximity to power and privilege, in proximity to the conditions that one needs to be well and to thrive. What is my assignment, right? To make those things more equal, to create the conditions where people have what they need to thrive. And so that's sort of my stance, if you will, my practice. I think it's, I think it's a different way of answering your question, but it's the way I feel like I navigate that idea of karma. And I feel like it's very real time, like the evidence of the gross inequality, right, that we're all a part of is undeniable. I mean, everywhere you look, right, it's everywhere. And so anyway, so I feel like, if we're open to seeing and being radically aware, right, and confronting all that is in this particular moment and all that we come from, then we can't not see our place in it and participate, engage, and act, right, from a really skillful place and from a place of conspiring, quite frankly, to create a world where everyone can thrive. But the understanding, by the way, that like my well-being, my privilege, right, like all the things that you were naming, right, isn't separate. It's not isolated from that of other people, and that's really the the theory behind what I propose in this book is that no matter how much yoga you do or what kind of electric car you drive or how much juice, green juice you drink or supplements you take, you actually really can't be well, right, when so many people are suffering.
Absolutely.
And I think the many myths that I expose, and one of them is individualism, sells us this idea that we can, right? The industry of wellness sells us this idea that we can actually thrive and be our best selves and live our best lives. I'm saying all those things very facetiously, right? If we just buy this and buy into that, and actually, I feel like the world is saying, yeah, no, you can't. And we just need to wake up to that.
And so what's the bridge for, well, two questions. What's the bridge in the most immediate response before we end? And I have one other question for people, because in a tribal situation, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the last traditional elders on this planet. And it's kind of mind-blowing when I see how out of balance the human species, forget race, human species is with the ecosystem of this planet. And it's not so much about waste and pollution, it's just the relationship with the planet. We are so far off center because what they can do is pretty amazing with very small amount of resources. I would say they have all the wealth in the world and that knowledge. So what's the bridge? Because in those tribes, if one person, this is how finite it is, if you and I are in the same tribe and you have a nightmare, everything stops because your mind is not in balance. So it's our tribe's responsibility to settle your soul, your mind, your being, so that we can move on. And some people might call that suspicious, if you look at when you use the word colonization, like, oh, that's suspicious, but it's an awareness that, oh, Kerri's mind's a little disturbed today. How can we bring harmony back in? Because then when we go in the woods, there's harmony. There's no Prozac or anxiety or stress, because the animals would go wild if that was there, right? So for you in this moment, if we're back in the urban jungle, what is our bridge back to well-being for all in this most, like, for those that are listening, like, what's that first step that someone can take to start to acknowledge that it's not just about them and how they can make an effort for self and their community?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I appreciate like you asking about the bridge and not the destination, right? Because this is such a long road we're going to be on, of, repair and regeneration. There's two things that I sort of offer up and explore myself in this book. And one is like, what is the personal work that we need to do, and what is the collective work that we need to do? And another way to think about that is like, what is the inner work and what is the external work, or what is the personal work and what is the political work? And the reason I framed it up that way is because I think often in dominant culture, we see a lot of people engaging in either or, right? A lot of wellness people navel gazing and really just like, doing the sort of individual transformational work that we know isn't enough, right, to translate into the collective transformation we so desperately need. And then in a lot of, I'm in a lot of, activist movement spaces that actually don't include enough of the personal reckoning and the personal transformational work. So anyway, so I just wanted to name that as a framework that for me in my own exploration, it's been about bridging both of those things, right? And understanding that both are really essential, right? If we want whole change, right? And the other thing that's coming up for me based on what you were saying, for me as a part of the personal work, right? As a part of the personal inquiry, the personal reckoning, the personal grappling that I did, both in the writing of this book, but for a really long time, right, since 9/11, and I continue to do this work, includes some of the questions you seeded when you began this around what have we forgotten, and what is the medicine that is already here, and much of that, right, which is indigenous. And I think the thing that I want to share about that is, I think people know that there's great wisdom in indigenous knowledge. And I also think that because of colonization, and this is obviously steeped in Western wellness culture, there's been a lot of stealing of other people's cultures, and taking, right? And so for me, in my own personal practice, this invitation has been given to me from other, community leaders. It's been to go back and get myself. My friend Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams always, says that, you have to go back and get yourself, especially if you're white-bodied and your ancestors gave up, right, abandoned so much of their culture to assimilate into the, American project. And that was the case for me. And so I share that because so much of what I've uncovered actually points to exactly what you're saying, which is, the medicine of my Celtic ancestors, right? The medicine of my Italian ancestors contains so much of the wisdom that we need to like remember that we're deeply interdependent, right? That we're a part, we're not just like on the earth, we are a part of the earth, right? And that we're not just a part of the problem, we're a part of the solution, right? The other thing that it teaches me is that we're not just in this lifetime, right? We're connected to our ancestors, to the people that we come from, and we're connected to the future, to the generations that are to come. And so I just share that because I have been in my own exploration of what is the medicine that I come from, that is a part of my ancestral lineage, and what does that have to teach me, right? That's relevant to this moment. What do I need to remember and reclaim that can help us navigate this particular moment? That has been ruptured, right, so deeply by the forgetting of a lot of those truths, right? The truth of interdependence, right? The truth of mutuality, even the truth of oneness, right? That gets misunderstood and weaponized by white Western wellness culture, right? Is a part of that. Ancestral culture. So anyway, so I just share that because that has been a part of my own journey of exploration. And I believe that going back and getting ourselves, going back and reclaiming, remembering our medicine, not someone else's medicine. I feel like sometimes we reach right? We reach for someone else's medicine because we've been divorced from our own. That feels like it's a part of the bridging that we need right now. So that we're not reaching outside of ourselves for the answers and for the solutions, but that we're, we're returning, quite frankly, to what we have already known, and then we're innovating from there. We're moving forward from that place, and from a place of like, we're not alone in this, right? We actually have to find new ways of being together, even as we're situated in these really toxic cultures, these really unequal systems. It's like, how do we move forward together and do the least amount of harm?
Yeah. Oh, and for you, what medicine have you discovered? Have you found it from your ancestry?
Oh my God. I mean, how do you find? I don't even know, like, what, I feel like, there's been, right? Like, it's like, I'm not sure what I'm seeking yet, and what the destination is. So I'm not sure. Okay. And what I'll share though, is that I'm like, what you're making me think about is like, how do I know I'm onto something on this path, and yeah, what I'll share is that as I've pieced together to the best of my ability, right? And even being able to piece together one's lineage, I feel like is a privilege to some extent, because, many people have been cut off from that. But what I've been able to piece together has given me a sense of like wholeness that I just didn't feel, growing up sort of in like in modern times without sort of without that, like the resource of the culture and the medicine that I came from outside of being American, right? And so that has like given me a sense of like wholeness that I've never known before, and I didn't know to look there, right? Which I find really helpful, especially as we have to like stand in this really uncomfortable moment and navigate, right, the many different ways in which we're disproportionately impacted and we're also implicated. So that's been really helpful. I feel like it's made me feel like I have more ground to stand on, like my foundation is firmer, because I know my roots are like solid.
Yeah, you know where you come from.
Exactly.
So what calls to you from those cultures, like your Celtic and your Italian culture?
Yeah. Well, my Italian food calls to me from my Italian culture, always. Right, and the yeah, exactly. Food calls to me from my Italian culture, but also the ritual around breaking bread and eating in family, and that's been, and that's actually been a part of my life, my whole life, but I never appreciated it in the way that I do now. But from my Celtic ancestry, an invitation to come back to the sacredness of land and the sacredness of water has been resonating with me. And, you were talking about the urban jungle. I grew up in New York, and concrete has been my life, and I'm like, I'm many, many generations of New York. I have a family of firemen and nurses, and I tell that story in my book. And so I'm like New York to the core, right? And I'm talking about the New York, obviously, that came after, the Lenape were already there, stewarding that land. And in my, I would say in the last, 5 to 10 years, I've been really called to nature. So I now live in California. I live in a canyon. I'm surrounded by trees. I mean, I sort of swung the pendulum all the way in the other direction, right? And my family is like, what happened to you, And I don't know if I could articulate it, but I just felt called back. And now I do a lot of my work, when I'm not in the field, organizing and advocating, I'm in nature. I'm in nature every day. I wake up in nature. I wake up to trees. So anyway, so I would say that has been the most profound medicine for me, and also the most radical way in which I've shifted the conditions of my life. I'm really clear that's I need to drink from that well as often as I can if I want to stay in the conversation, if I want to keep going, and if I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I'm here for the fight, right? I'm here for the future. Right. And so therefore, I'm in a contemplation of like, what are the ways in which I need to take care of myself so that I can keep going.
Yeah. So you brought up something really beautiful about like you've discovered these elements that are from your ancestral roots that are actually the medicine to retain harmony in your daily life so you can go out into the world and be more effective. Would you say that's true? That you've discovered these things that keep you in harmony? That you've discovered these things from your ancestral roots being like food and breaking bread and the sacredness of land and water, and that when you engage with those, that gives you your kind of your mojo, for lack of better words, to go out and be an activist in the world and educate others.
I would say that's part of it for sure. And one of the things I had to get really clear about when I was writing this book is like, what do I mean when I say wellness? When I was called to like the wellness practices, even before I was kind of doing this particular work of disrupting wellness and democratizing wellness, I really feel like I was being called to wholeness. Like I wanted to feel whole, right? I wanted to feel true. It wasn't just about feeling good. It was about like just feeling centered. You know what I mean? And I say that because what you're naming about harmony, I feel like is related to wholeness, right? Because it speaks to resonance. It speaks to our interrelatedness with ourselves, with all parts of ourselves, and also with everyone and everything around us. So for absolutely, the kind of the reaching back to get myself and to learn more about the history and the people, the land, the culture that I come from has really helped me feel more whole and more connected, right? In all of the ways, right? Forward and back, up and down, and the other thing I'll just add is I have also discovered so much harmony and realignment, right? Course correction, if you will, transformation, just in the activism, right? Like in the showing up in relationship, in the feeling purpose as a part of something bigger than myself, in the finding my place in the movement, right? My particular role and responsibility as a part of this sort of collective moving towards something better has also, I feel like, even more than like the yoga and all the things that hooked me at first, has really given me a sense of harmony, has really given me a sense of peace, a sense of hope in times of deep despair. So I wanted to share that too, because, that's been some of the most radical discovery for me in my own wellness practice, is that so much of the practice for me showed up off the mat. It wasn't in the meditation or in the yoga, right? Or even in the mantras. It was in the streets. It was side by side in solidarity with fast food workers. It was, working across lines of difference, right? To like confront the beast that is white supremacy. And so anyway, so that too has given me so much meaning and purpose, and has really helped me orient myself in this moment and feel a part of something, and feel also, I know it can feel really hard right now, right? Like things are stacking up against our collective survival, and yet participating, engaging, being a part of, right, the movement of transformative change, the movement toward the future that we all deserve, I feel like has given me a greater sense of wholeness than much of the wellness, the Western wellness antidotes that I was hooked by originally. And so that's sort of why I'm like, yes to these practices. I still meditate every morning. I still move on my mat every morning. That's sort of how I prepare myself for being in the world. But the real practice for me is out there, right? It's like hardcore. It's like conflict and confrontation, and it's, song and dance and beauty and innovation and emergence.
Absolutely. Aho. Well, I think a lot of the misunderstood aspect of yoga is that yoga is designed to bring the mind to a place of service and in harmony with self, and so many things, not to get in a yoga discussion, but I feel like you've just let yoga finally awaken in you, because ultimately we are here to benefit all. And that's a common sentiment from people in the East, to be of service to their community. It's not separate from or not expected to be handed to them from some agency, but to everyone is actively participating. Like in the pandemic, a Sikh community was preparing thousands of meals every single day, coming out and serving their community with food. So active service, yes, more of it, please.
Yeah, right.
For you, when you're out and serving, and I think this is a place, especially now, people are craving connectivity and action, somewhere. And if it can be with a purpose, it's even better, in my opinion. You have established an organization called Citizen Well, kind of in response or in hand with your book. And one thing I had noticed there was about, having difficult conversations, because right now there's been so much division. It's like, it is a battlefield, and so in like media world to physical world, because everyone's just like holding their line, what they believe to know to be true. And how would you encourage people to reach across the table, across the street, across a dilemma, and listen to each other? What are some tools that they can do to not assume? Because if certain people use certain words, they get triggered, and other people use other words, they get triggered. How can we come together and with an open heart, listen, and then like have, the whole time like, oh, she was so fun to debate, and not in an arguing way. Like the art of debate is lost on this planet because people get upset.
Yeah.
But how can we have those conversations that aren't so comfortable sometimes, but what comes out of it is super powerful? Can you share some tools for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll just share, thank you for bringing up Citizen Well. Citizen Well has actually been around for about 7 years. And so I say that because so much of what I needed to learn to write this book happened in that work. And I'm really grateful for it. And Citizen Well is a kind of compilation of many different contributions and voices from movement leaders. And so it is most definitely not just mine. But it really put me on this path of both asking, like, what's in the way of collective well-being, and then how do we show up, right, to confront all of those systemic and political barriers that are holding so many people back from being well. So one of those tools, and I would say practices and muscles that we build in the culture of our community is how to have hard conversations and how to navigate conflict. And you're exactly right. So much of what ails us in our culture, in our dominant culture right now, is our inability to embrace conflict, to navigate conflict. I think we find that we either avoid conflict or we take a hammer to it. And so, right, so that feels like important context setting, because I think often people think that the antidote to division is sameness, and it's not actually. Like, people are having very different lived experiences, and people need different things, and conflict is just a part of the human experience, right? So like, I say that because I think it's important that we normalize conflict. And what you were saying about debate, like, debate is healthy, right? Having hard conversations is necessary. How we build the muscles around active listening, around, taking inventory of what we don't know, so that we're not making assumptions about other people, right? That can be really harmful and dangerous, or even exposing, right? transparently the assumptions often that we make when we're working across lines of difference or when we're navigating conflict can be very healthy and helpful. And there's a lot of amazing, I just want to say, there's a lot of amazing resources out there right now about how to navigate conflict, how to navigate harm. I'm thinking about the book Fumbling Towards Repair by Miriam Kaba and Shira Hassan. I'm thinking about We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. I mean, there's just like so much good stuff out in the world, good resources and tools, and so many teachers that we can turn to for how to be in this moment, right? How to be in this stance and how to lean more courageously, right, with more capacity into conflict. But the other thing that I'll just say about what you were naming is, this is probably the question I get most often, right? Like, how do I reach across the aisle, or how do I go get my Trump cousin, or, you know, like, I think often we think about the person that's furthest from us that we need to engage. And often I think we need to convince them that they're wrong or turn them or something, you know, persuade them to believe something different. And actually my hypothesis is that we have more work to do with the people that are more proximal to us. You know, when we think about the story of division we hear about in the media right now, about the far right and the far left, you know, there's not a lot of those people. We're all shouting at each other over Twitter, but there's not a lot of them, right? We're all, you know, we're all making a mess, and we're the loudest voices, right? But actually, I think where the work is in the messy middle. It's in the very, and there's one statistic in my book that was so mind-blowing to me. It's in chapter 7 when I write about the politics of belonging. And it was a research study that came out a couple of years ago that said that the biggest divide isn't between the right and the left. The biggest divide is, in fact, between the people who are engaged politically and the people who aren't. And in this study, 80% of Americans said that they were less interested in politics, that they weren't engaged politically. And that blew my mind, right? So we're all talking about this division, right, within 20% of the population, when 80% is checked out. They just don't even want to engage. It's too messy and hot, right? There's too much fire in there. So anyway, so that's often where I like to play when I'm organizing folks and when I'm working with folks about how to have hard conversations, is I'm like, don't worry about your cousin who's on the opposite side of the aisle, right? I mean, definitely disrupt if harm is happening, right? Be that person. But like, who are the people closer to you, the people you work with, the people in your yoga studio, the people in your family, the people, you know, on your block, who are checked out or who don't have the muscle or the conditioning, right, to talk about white supremacy, or aren't interested in voting, or you know, we just saw this with the pandemic, or people who really are turning away from collective care, right, towards like hyper individualistic anti-mask actions, things like that. I was like, those are actually the people we need to work on. Is the broader middle, right? And the way that I think we work with them is we learn how to listen and how to have deeper conversations that are rooted in values. Like, what do these people value, right? What do they care about? What's motivating them? What's driving them? And how can we better understand that so that we can build spaces and communities and containers and narratives that actually speak more deeply to, you know, their hopes and their fears, right? Their values. It's sort of what, you know, Dr. King speaks to. You know, we need a radical revolution of values, right? We need to realign, right, and recalibrate ourselves about what matters towards collective survival, right, towards mutual care. You know, towards wellness for all people. So anyway, so that's sort of more the focus, you know, I've been interested in, is like, who are the people nearest to you, and where are they? How can you engage them more deeply, right? in these really challenging conversations.
Yeah, and then if we take it out of such a macro thing, because, you know, when we talk about wellness and we look at it as a community space, and if we really empower the community to establish well-being, there's not really a need for overarching agencies at all. Because if the community is running well, there's no problems. Everyone's taken care of. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, I think
if everyone's well,
yeah,
you don't have homelessness, you don't have
that part,
mental
that
illness,
part.
You know, everyone has a bed to lay their head on, and there's means to get wellness if one is ill in any capacity. If that's taken care of in the local community, right? And then that becomes a model potentially.
I think that's right. And I think, you know, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of really, you know, high capacity mutual aid networks, right, emerge outside of the state, right, in the absence of systems, you know, federal and state systems that take care of us, that are in particular taking care of the most vulnerable, right? We need to take care of each other. And so we know we have that capacity. And look, that's been happening, especially in marginalized communities for all of time, right? Folks have been figuring out subversively how to survive outside the state. And I think more people, especially more people with proximity to power and privilege, are realizing that, you know, the systems are actually not taking care of them either. And so I think it means that we both have to, like, to your point, play at the local level, play at the community and the relational level, right? Work subversively outside the state, right? To make sure people have what they need to survive and thrive. But I also think it means that for those of us who have proximity, right, to politics or to influencers or to decision makers, to political leaders, we also have a responsibility to, like, get in there and to apply some pressure, right? Because we also know that people are being harmed by the state. I'm thinking about the medical industrial complex, the prison industrial complex. So what I often encourage people is I encourage them to engage, right, at all different levels simultaneously, and not assume that the answer is in one sector, but rather, like, be engaged personally, be engaged relationally and socially at the local level, and also, like, be engaged, right, at the political level, state and federal, right, because there are consequences, right, to it, like, as you know, we're seeing this happen right now, right, with Roe being overturned.
Around that. Yeah, there's awakening.
Yes.
I say that's been the benefit is people have actually become more politically engaged, even though it can appear that it's very widespread. But I would say, to your point, there's more people in the silent middle than on either end of the spectrum. But either end of the spectrum tends to get really loud. And so
that's right.
The middle people get more and more silent. I'm like, okay. Go, where's the middle?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. So, and then from there, you know, just circle back to this idea of wellness, and then, like, in our ancestral roots, we carry the medicine, you know, within us, within our being, within our birthright of where we came from, no matter where that is. If you can share a little bit about your point of view or perspective on the reemergence of preservation of culture and how that looks, because there is a huge debate on a global level, from globalism to nationalism. Not really, I don't want to get into it too much politically, but just the idea of people and communities, that if we start stripping them away from the very medicine that keeps some of these communities, like when I go to the Philippines, those communities are amazing. They're farming. They don't have time for, like, 10 years of therapy on the sofa, and they're happy. They're, like, taking care of each other.
That's right.
Do they have $1 million in the bank or whatever? I don't know. That the capitalist lifestyle that the world has been fed? No, but they're happy and they appreciate things in a different way. So can you just share a little bit about that, like, from your lens? I would love to hear just of how if you feel we should preserve culture and how that can impact maybe the way that we coalesce as a global community.
I love that. I think the thing that's coming up for me in response to what you're asking, I think one of the things I tried to do in this book is not provide a prescription, right? Like most self-help books are like, here's the problem and here's the answer, And I was like, I don't have the answers, actually. I'm just going to grapple with the problems and my place in the problems, and also like what practices might be helpful as we navigate this moment. And I say that because I don't have an answer actually to your question, and I actually think that's maybe part of what's needed, because when I think about the history of colonization and imperialization and the exportation even of democracy, right, of capitalism, of individualism, globally from the U.S., from America, and how much of that has stripped, other cultures,
absolutely,
of what matters, of their values, of their medicine, or whitewashed it or Americanized it. It's just making me think about, like, I don't know how to preserve other people's culture. I actually think we just need to, like, stop fucking shit up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, stop intervening. Stop, right? Like, stop assuming we know what's best for other people. I'm thinking particularly about the long legacy of white saviorism, right? That is, in fact, steeped in Christian missionaries and colonization and imperialism and the military industrial complex that continues to this day. That, like, our hands are everywhere, right? The implications of our intervention is all over the world, and a lot of it isn't good. And so anyway, so that's sort of how I'm thinking about your question, is like, I don't know about the preservation of other cultures, and I don't know that I should, because I'm just another white person who doesn't, it's like not my business. I'm more concerned about, like, how do we help how do we disrupt and prevent further intervention, right? Further, indoctrination, further, meddling in other people's lives, right? And actually just be in a space of listening, because I believe people know what they need better than we do.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, so I'm sort of like, that's sort of how I'm thinking about your question, is like, I don't know, I don't have an answer for how do we preserve other people's cultures, except we should mind our own business and stop messing. Yeah, that's right. That might be the answer. That's right. That might be the answer, right? Is like, and also like reckon, I think there's repair in that too. Like, reckon with your part, right? I say your, meaning our, I'm thinking of this as like a white-bodied American, but like our part in meddling, in intervening, in exporting, in bringing our capitalist, patriarchal, white agenda into other parts of the world, and the repercussions, the consequences of that. Anyway, so like that feels, that's coming up for me too, is like not just stop, but like repair.
Yeah, well, reconciliation, making things right, as it would be called in native way. Can you, just to build on that a little bit, share what, because I think this conversation we're having is very daunting, and we do a full circle back to like the idea of karma, or cause and effect, which is more of a scientific term people can maybe relate to, is that, whatever we were born into, that's our bed to rest in and make right if we so choose. Can you share because, a lot of people love America, like if we're talking about white culture, that was birthed and born out of colonization of the North American continent. Can you share what you would feel like, if you're at your drafting table and you're going to point out as the value of that culture, and we're about to, I would say we're in an act of demolition right now. What are you going to leave? What walls are you going to leave of that culture?
It's a really great question. Some of what I write about in the book is the legacy of I mean, because we're a young country, right? And so we're a young country with a really vicious history, really violent and horrific legacy thus far. We're also, though, a country of revolution. We're a country of resistance, right? We're a country of resilience. Some of what I write about in the book that was really inspired by my stepdad, right, who was a fireman in the FDNY and who responded to the towers, right, is sort of what he and so many people in the wake of that horrific event chose to do on a whim, right? And without even thinking, they responded, right? They helped each other out. They did what was needed, right, to save lives and to provide refuge and relief, right? And so I'm thinking also about, how we're all sort of first responders, right, on the front lines of this really messy moment in history, this very precarious, right, moment in humanity, quite frankly. And so, so when I think about what it is to be, the positive story, or the legacy that I want to leave, or I want to be a part of, or I want to believe could be, like a part of the history of this country, or a part of the America that is yet to be. I think about, I want to like reference that, we do have a deep history of resistance. We do have a deep history of freedom fighters. We do have a deep history of people pushing back, and demanding better for themselves and for everyone. And so there's a seed there, I feel like, that I want to like continue to like plant and sow and harvest and nurture and nourish and grow. Like, I want to be a part of that history of America, that we're still a project, right? We're still an experiment. We are yet to be proven. There's a lot that went wrong with this experiment, right? But that we are a part also of a history of change makers, of innovation. And we just actually need to like innovate in the right direction. We need to recalibrate with values of interdependence, of love and compassion, and of collective care. And then maybe we can forge a different future, right, for ourselves and for one another. So that's like the thing that's coming up for me. That is a deep part of our history. In fact, we don't tell as much about that part of the history. But, something is emerging, right? And it's not coming out of nowhere. It's coming, it's coming from those roots. And so, like, how can we steer this country's future towards becoming that, right? That which revolutionizes itself, that which transforms, that which course corrects, that which repairs, right? That which tells a story of repair and reconciliation. That's the story that I want to be a part of.
Yeah. Oh, beautifully said. Well, there is, I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but there is a prophecy through Hopi Nation, and we're at the end of that. But part of that is the war started here and will end here. And with on the other side of that is peace. And then there's all the opportunities from there. And I would say most people that I've interacted, my friends, brothers and sisters from all over the world, they really are astounded by two things. They're astounded by our generosity, the care. There's and I think that comes with that preservation, like wanting to preserve freedom, no matter if people understand what that word, the price of that word, or the misrepresentation of that word, but they understand that they want to be free and want others to be free. So, and then the other part of it is that because of the generosity, it hasn't been a lot of balancing of the books, so to speak, when you look at a capitalist model.
Well said.
Based. And so that's been, I think, even shocking for a lot of my brothers and sisters around the world when they're like, oh, we didn't realize you Americans don't save. Where in other countries, because the resources are different, they always save. They put away. They're not trying to hedge a bet kind of thing for a rainy day. So, yeah. So I just, that was coming up in the moment.
Thank you for
the last.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that was coming up in my local community here in Southern California, we were hit by some of the rioting and looting, which was kind of hard. I was in the middle of it and never experienced anything like that. And your instincts are to jump in. Like, that was my instinct, like, one, to talk sense into people that were, destroying things for no apparent good reason. And then other people not even doing anything simultaneously. But what was beautiful the next morning is the whole community came out. It looked like Disneyland with brooms, buckets. I've never seen so many people. It didn't matter. Everyone came and just helped. And so that was that beautiful, like, resonance, like, no matter what, like, everyone's going to come out and help.
Yep.
I didn't care what your political view was, what your ethnic view was, or embodiment is. You're just like, we're going to clean this up because it doesn't feel right, to have all our local businesses destroyed. So
I love that so much. I'm so glad you shared that. And one of the things you just made me think about, my mentor, Taj James, often says, like, follow the people who know the way. And I'm just thinking about how we're surrounded by people who know the way, right?
Yeah.
Indigenous people, Black Indigenous people of color, like, people who have been marginalized and who have been carving a path, right? Innovating their way towards well-being for a really long time. And for those of us who feel disoriented or lost, we can step back and follow, right? And listen and learn. So thank you for sharing that, because that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your great work. I've consumed all the time that I was allotted, down to a little bit beyond. I want you to share real quick in closing, one, what's next for you. We'll be putting the links below. I really, for the listeners, like, the one thing I love about your book is all the resources, all the information that you put in there, your language, your passion. In addition, my favorite part is your questions, like the reflective questions to sit with, because those are so valuable. Oftentimes we forget to ask ourselves. We may see sound bites, but we forget to ask ourselves some questions. So anyone out there that cares about, the well-being of humans on planet Earth, please check out the book and answer the questions, see what comes up. But can you share what's next for you, and what do you have your hands in real time right now, aside from shining a light on your great work?
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing about the book. And I mean, this is my first book. And so what I'll share is that birthing a book is like an entirely new thing for me. So much. My answer is going to be, I don't know, in a lot of different ways. So I'm putting this book out into the world, and I feel like it's an invitation to be in conversation. So I'm actually not sure what's next, especially around the book. I'm just excited to be in conversation with people like you, quite frankly, because that's unlocking new questions for me, and new dimensions of the work and areas that I haven't gone yet. So that's one thing, is like, I'm just really, really looking forward to the many conversations that I hope, and questions actually, that I hope that this book inspires, and the community, right, that emerges from that, and the relationships. And the other thing I'll just say is that I have, in all caps, I really genuinely don't know, given what we're up against politically in the U.S. right now. And I say that skillfully. I say it not from like I don't know. I say that from a place of like, I believe we need to get ready for what's coming. Like, we need to organize. We need to do the conditioning, as Resmaa Menakem calls us to do, and the capacity building, right, that our spiritual practice and our relational practice, encourages. Because I think there's a lot of uncertainty ahead, and there's a lot of risk. And so I say that not to scare people, but just to like, you know, for me, it's like I wake up every morning and I'm like, how do I get ready for my day? How do I prepare myself, right? What is the practice of building the capacity to show up fully for whatever this day has in store for me? So I mean that like on an everyday practice level, but I really mean that on a political level. Like, you know, we've got Roe is going to be overturned in a couple of weeks. We've got, you know, what's going to be a very messy midterm, and lots of other things really happening around the country at the local and state level, voting, you know, voter disenfranchisement, threats to trans lives. And so anyway, we've got our hands full, and I just think it's really important for folks to prepare themselves to do the you know, the practice and the capacity building and the community building that's needed for us, so that when we need to respond in the ways that we are called to, we're going to be ready. And so that's sort of like my stance right now is just like be ready for what's coming, and be skillful and be discerning, and do, you know, do the best that you can and do the least amount of harm.
Well said. Capacity is a key word, evaluating our own and other people's capacities. So let downs happen in there. Well, you are an absolute treat to speak with. I hope to have you back in the future to engage in more thoughtful conversations. And until then, thank you for being here, and I wish you so much well-being, and thank you for shining a light on where we need to look next.
Thank you, Suzanne. This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you for like the deep, deep questions. And yeah, I'm down to come back. Let's stay in conversation.
Once again, I want to thank Kerri Kelly for being here in this moment, and all of you listening in. As inspired, check out her great work below. In addition, supporting her work by purchasing and sharing it, and starting a conversation in your local communities worldwide. Until next time, this is Suzanne signing out with a full heart, a soft gaze, a deep bow, and a namaste. Be simply.